people who have survived an attempted murder. What is your story? I drunkenly chose to take a piss up a drug dealer's house window. In the moment I thought it was funny. He proceeded to come out whilst I was mid-piss and then chased me with a machete. I managed to get away with my dick swinging in the wind. My older sister tried to stab me with a large knife in an attempt to kill me on my 16th birthday. My mother grabbed the knife off her before it got my stomach and slammed her against the fridge and yelled at me to run. Last time I saw my older sister, she said, "I've gotten over it and you should too. It's pathetic to hang on to it." She then told people it was self-defense because I tried to hurt her. I was literally eating my birthday breakfast. I didn't sleep properly for 2 years while she was in the house because she constantly tried to break into my room at night to slit my throat while I slept. I hate her. I feel like I am very late to the party, but my uncle was attempted murdered by random and pure bad luck. He was living in a high-rise and some crackhead pressed every single buzzer. Someone let him in out of laziness, not caring, wanting the buzzer to stop. The crackhead proceeded to knock on every single door down the hallways, and my uncle is the first to answer the door. The crackhead pulls out a pair of scissors and plunges them into his throat. The crackhead then nonchalantly walks out of the building and says to a passing couple, "You should probably call the police because I just murdered someone." He was picked up very quickly, and my uncle survived for a year or two before his epilepsy killed him. In addition, it was a very small world, as my uncle went to school with this crackhead 30 years earlier and knew his name to identify him. Not that there needed any more evidence in the case. I delivered a pizza to a house just outside of the city. On the way back, I stopped to help a car that pulled over in front of me with their hazard lights on. I pulled up beside them and thought it was weird that nobody rolled down a window or made any kind of contact with me for around 15 seconds. The passenger then jumped out of his side of the car, yelling that they needed help as he made his way toward my car. I thought something was weird about this. As I started to pull away before he could get to my passenger door, he began shooting at me. I ducked my head after the first shot entered through the back window and embedded in my passenger seat headrest. Another shot entered through the rear window, while the other 3 only hit the outside metal parts of my car. He missed altogether with another shot. I remember being sure I was about to die as he fired more shots at me. I was very surprised that it wasn't panicky. It was just like, "Oh, I guess this is it." Turns out it was a plot to rob me. The pizza was ordered, and the guys were stationed down the road to intercept me. They knew who I was, and they knew that I would be able to recognize them, as I had delivered a few orders to them before. The guy wasn't wearing anything to cover his identity, which leads me to believe that he would have shot and killed me if he would have made it inside my car. By the next morning, they had all been arrested. The shooter was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. He later appealed that sentencing because there was a word wrong in the jury instructions. He won the appeal and ended up being sentenced to 10 years, and was released November of 2010 after 5 years. The remaining 5 years were to be served as parole probation. He was arrested twice for parole probation violation when he was only a couple months away from total freedom. I laughed. Some people tried to murder me for pizza money. They shot. They missed. They got caught. They did time, but not enough, then did more. I saw 2 people stab someone to death in what I assume was a drug deal gone wrong, when I was on a night walk. Spent another hour being chased and hiding in a backyard so they wouldn't do the same to me. Scary night. My parents moved to Mozambique during the mid-90s. I was around 8 at the time and started going to school there, a nice private one. Can't complain. My father was working for the Red Cross in Chimoio, so we had a comfortable life. One day, before arriving to school with a friend of mine, some sketchy guy stopped us, offered a whole bunch of money to just take some small box to a white van that was parked at the end of the street, not even 100 meters away. My lucky day, I guessed. It actually was, but for different reasons. When I was going to go grab the box, my friend grabbed me by the shirt, pushed me, and started running, screaming, something I didn't understand in Shona, the local dialect. But that moment was when it clicked. The moment I looked back, the guy had already vanished. So, wherever you are, thank you, Chewed. I will never forget you. Damn, was he trying to kidnap you? Oregon traffic. Trust me, this shit is real. I spent 10 years of my life in Nigeria. Actually, I was born there. It ain't uncommon to see corpses on the floor, missing some vital organ. Sometimes head, private parts, fingers and toes. It's really scary. When I was a kid, probably around in the 2nd grade, our house got robbed and my mom and I came home while it was in progress. For whatever reason, she decided to go in and interrupt them. She grabbed her gun, didn't shoot, yelled at them to, "Get the fuck out of my house." And then we drove off in a hurry to the corner store to call the cops. This was before cell phones. Less than 2 weeks later, my mom and I are sitting in the living room on the couch, our backs to the front door. Someone drives by and fires about 6 or 8 shots into the front of our house. Thank God for a steel front door. The cops came and said they didn't think the 2 incidents were related. Neighbor stabbed me in the chest because I hit him over the head twice with a 10-pound weight to try to stop him stabbing his wife. However, I'm fat, and the knife didn't go deep enough through my breast tissue to do any damages. Yay for being fat. He's still up for attempted murder, though. When I was 6 years old, I saw my bio dad stab my bio mom 20 times in front of my little brother and I. He took my bio mom's blood and rubs it on my brother's face and said, "This is your mother's blood. She almost died right in front of us." They got her to the hospital in enough time to save her life. But I was scary and I remember everything. He only went to jail for 8 years. He claimed he heard demons telling him to do it. I posted this story already a long while back. But basically, I worked in a jail and a guy from a 1% biker gang tried to pay $10,000 to have me killed because he somehow got the idea that I was the Fed who busted him and was merely pretending to be a jailer so I could spy on him. Don't do meth, kids. The guy was bragging about it, and one of the other inmates who I had saved from a heart attack with first aid didn't like that, so he beat the living shit out of the guy, and then told me about it. Phone call recordings confirmed that he had promised the money to 2 guys if they shot me in the back of the head while escorting him to court and busted him out. Federal marshals rolled them up, and on his way to court I whispered to him, "Your friends won't be joining us." When we got to the planned ambush point, instead of a bond hearing, he got charged for trying to have me murdered and organizing an escape. Not my story, but a girl I went to high school with. She had a flat tire driving home from work one night during college and was pulled over in the side of the road. A car pulls up and she thinks someone is getting out to help. A dude just fucking rushes her, slits her throat and stabs her a few times, then gets back in his car and speeds off. She managed to make it to a nearby house and survived, but they never caught the guy. Fucking terrifying. A little bit of background here: we use Telegram to buy drugs. We have this big group with lots of dealers, very sorted, very handy. So I just got home from college and parked my car on the street. It was about 23:00 and I was just sitting and browsing my phone. At some point I got into Telegram to read some work-related messages when suddenly a guy opens the passenger door and tries to get in. I'm trying to push him out and he's like, "Shay, you better not," and points to the driver's window where another guy was standing pointing a gun at me. He gets into the car, and from the back another guy comes in, so now there's 3 of them, one on the passenger seat, one by the driver's window, which by now opened the door and putting the gun to my head, and another who was sitting in the back and was pointing a knife to my neck. And at first I got really confused, and I was like, "What the fuck, guys?" The guy next to me started talking about money I owe them and started searching my car. I told them they're mistaken, and he was like, "I saw you browsing Telegram, so don't shit me." At that point, from some reason, I got really calm, as I do not do drugs and I don't owe nobody money. I tried to explain that I was just reading work messages, but the guy with the gun got really mad and hit me with the gun. He tried to pull me out and the dude next to me stopped him and said there's an easy way to check, so he took my phone and started going through everything. At some point he got into my messages with my mom, my little sister. He was checking where do I work. He got into the gallery and found pictures of my dog, and that's when I worried the most. He said to his friends, "Look how cute his dog is, ain't it? You love your dog, do you?" And I didn't reply. Few minutes later and he finds nothing. Then he explains me that they supplied some guy 4,000's worth of weed and he never paid. Next he says sorry and they're off. I was sitting in my car when 3 armed men jumped in thinking I owe them drug money. I wasn't. We were arguing. He started to grab me by the arms, throw me against the wall to the ground. After maybe the 7th or 8th time of him throwing me, he carried me by my arms to my room, threw me onto the bed. Then, he pinned me down, started choking me. I had tried to get away before it happened, but he grabbed my face, shoved me down. I started to see flashes of black-white. I don't remember how, but I managed to get my feet under him onto his chest, was able to push him off me. He was my boyfriend at the time. I couldn't believe someone who claimed to love me could do something like that. Now, every time I feel even the slightest bit of not being able to breathe, I picture his face. To make matters worse, he stalked me for like 8 months after I broke up with him. He also told me if he would have gone through with it, he would have burned my house down with me in it. For everyone asking what happened that led up to this, I found out he was talking to another girl, so I confronted him, told him to go be with her if that's what he wanted. This made him mad because I wouldn't fight for him. He started shouting, claiming that I didn't love him. When I pointed out that he was the one who couldn't have possibly loved me, because he was talking about a future with this other girl, he got mad. That's when he started tossing me around. Hopefully this counts. I live in an extremely rural area. My dad was super abusive. He did a lot of fucked up stuff like stomp my mom's head into a sidewalk when she was 5 months pregnant. Fast forward to when I was 8 years old, he decided to bring the girl he was cheating on my mom with to their house to beat my mom. My mother fled to our only neighbor's house to call the police because he cut the phone lines. He left to take his side chick home, so my mother went to get our important documents. He came back starting beating on Mom again and said he was going to kill us for calling the cops, and they show up while he was getting his rifle. They arrested him for domestic violence, and he got a slap on the wrist because my uncle, his brother, worked with police force as a dispatcher and made it all go away. My mom was completely broken down mentally from brainwashing for years and under heavy influence from his family that it was her fault and they should work it out. They ended up sweeping that under the rug and the fact that he raped me from 2 years to 7 years. Then after all the trauma Mom went through, she went psycho and became an abuser for a long period of time until she tried to stab me to death for not washing dishes one night my senior year. I got away and put myself into debt to go to college to escape that. Years later she started to recover from what he did and I forgave her. I guess the silver lining was that I learned even the sweetest, kindest people can crack under the right circumstances. We may have survived that, but he absolutely destroyed our mental and physical health. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to die than to live with the aftermath. It's been hard. Don't know if this counts as murder, but I was on my way to grab breakfast with my sister. As we left the house, there were helicopters flying around outside, and we didn't think much of it. We started down the road and noticed that there were no cars or people anywhere. As we were driving, a car was swerving behind us and going super fast. He pulled up next to us and got out with a gun and pointed it right at my sister's face. She slammed on the accelerator and we turned down a few streets until we were sure he wasn't following us. We headed straight home and turned on the news. Turns out he had shot 8 and killed 2 other people in the neighborhood, and was later shot by police a few hours later. I'll try to make it short. In my high school, there were 6 kids who always used to bully me. Once we went to a camping in a forest. They dragged me into a remote location and beat me with whatever they got. I passed out soon. When I woke up, I was in an operation theater and unable to move. To be honest, I don't know whether the operation theater event was real or a dream. After the surgery, I was in coma for 3 weeks. I broke 9 bones, lost 2 toes and an eye. Took me months to get out of hospital, and I also failed that grade. It took me years to forget that event. The worst part is that no action was taken against those kids as their parents were high-level officers in Air Force. Not me, but my mother. My mother was 7, 8 months pregnant with her first child when one day her mother-in-law gave her a pudding mixed with poison. Soon after, it started taking effect and naturally affected the baby too. She was in labor and begged her in-laws and husband, my dad, to take her to the hospital, but they just refused to. She spent the whole night in pain, and in the morning, around 4 o'clock in the morning, they took her to the hospital. The doctors said they couldn't explain how she managed to survive, as her blood was contaminated and the fetus had died in her womb at night. My dad took the fetus away before anyone could see him. My ex-husband snapped because he was going through withdrawal. I dialed 911, then he got me. He hit me across the head with a metal. Chair, chalked me, stomped my ribs and pounded and grounded my face. The cops got there just in time. He went to jail. He had pulled my hair out and threw it in the sink. I had broken ribs and a broken eye socket. When it's happening, you don't feel pain. I felt nothing until maybe an hour afterwards. That was the last time I saw him. I had post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. I lost a piece of my ear when a guy tried to shoot me. I was on my way home from the pub one night. To get home, I had to walk through a rough part of town. I'm not unfamiliar with the area, and I know a few people around there on good terms, so I know the rules about walking around there at night. Anyway, in one house there was an argument, and I heard things were getting smashed up. I'll admit I kinda snitched. I pulled out my phone, opened up Facebook, and sent a message to the local police. Then there was a fucking gunshot. This guy comes running out, and I'm right on the path where he was running to. He just stops, raises his gun, and fucking shoots. I think the noise from the explosion from the gunshot hurt more than a bullet ripping out a chunk of my ear. Then again, I was probably in shock. I just stood there and froze up. Thankfully, the guy didn't stop to make sure he hit me and just kept running as another guy came running out of the house with a gun in his hand, too. He asked me where he went, but I was just frozen in shock and had blood running down my neck. Anyway, cops arrived a few minutes later, followed by an ambulance. That was 6 years ago now, I think. Turns out the guy shot his girlfriend's brother, and it was her dad who came chasing after him. I don't think it was really attempted malicious murder, just ignorance murder. I was in the emergency department for what I found out months later was a gallbladder attack. At the time I was in so much pain I couldn't think or see straight. I could barely sit up. I was sweating. It was bad. Doctor tells me I'm on drugs. I've never done drugs in my life. I don't even drink. I'd even quit smoking. He ignores me and tells me to stop pretending. He gives me Toradol. I am very, very, very allergic to Toradol. I broke out in a rash from head to toe, and my whole body felt like it was on fire. I told the doctor. He told me I'd done it to myself from being so dramatic, and he's discharging me. He leaves and I start getting super lightheaded and start shivering uncontrollably. I kept pressing my call light and I was crying and saying help, but no one was coming. A nurse walked out of a room next to me and peered in and saw me and fucking ran. We need help in room 7. Within seconds my nurse was there, with a big cart. I'm laying down at this point. I remember her yelling at me to answer and stay awake, but I couldn't. I remember the blood pressure cuff going off and looking at the numbers, and they were low, and pulse was dropping too. I was just really warm and sleepy and didn't care about anything anymore. She kept telling me not to go to sleep, but it's the only thing I wanted to do in the whole world. I woke up about 7 hours later, still covered in a rash and kind of confused, but otherwise okay. Alive, at least. Still hate doctors to this day. Don't know if this counts as attempted murder. Anyways, bad things always seem to happen to me. I was raped at knife point, he said. Don't scream or move, or else I'll cut your throat. This is one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I was crying and covered in blood after things were done, and I could barely stand. I felt so afraid and lost with my life, and oftentimes I still do. I was 17, in the front yard with a few friends. Heard a lot of gunshots go off. Not unusual in the South. Noticed 2 guys quickly get in a car on my road parked about 50 yards from my house, and driving our way. Thought I'd step to the side of the road and ask them what they were doing. The driver slows to a stop, points the gun at my chest, and pulls trigger 3 times. Click, click, click. No bullets. Then speeds off. Immediately I knew something was wrong. There is a mom and pop store around the corner, so me and my friend ran over there. First thing we see is a guy shot dead in parking lot while wife and kid was screaming. I was in shock. Walked in the store to find the store owner in the back, shot dead. Random dude shot me in the chest because he thought I was my drug dealer neighbor. My neighbor was 192 centimeters and black. I'm 180 centimeters and white. Joke's on him. All he got were a few cigarettes, some pocket change, second-degree homicide conviction. Ex-wife broke into my apartment after an argument on the phone where I told her there was no chance of getting back together. 6 days prior I had had a surgery to remove my right testicle due to testicular cancer and had a fake testicle put in. I was in a lot of pain and couldn't really walk. After hanging up the phone with my ex, I took a double dose of pain meds and fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of my door bursting open and someone charging up the stairs. Before I could even say, "Get out," she was on top of me, swinging, kicking, biting, trying to choke me out. All the while screaming, "I'm going to fucking kill you." There was a struggle. I made it to my phone, called 911, but then she knocked the phone out of my hands and kicked me in the nuts. Having only had surgery 6 days before, the pain was intense. I saw a white light, and once things came back into focus, she was straddling me with your hands around my throat, choking the shit out of me. I screamed my address and that I need help over and over as I tried to get her off me. She was sitting on my incision from the surgery, though in the pain I was experiencing made it impossible. Then I started to see stars creeping into my field of view, and I realized I was either being choked out or passing out from the pain. In a last-ditch effort to save myself, I threw a left hook and knocked her out. Cops came. Saw my door kicked on, with footprints on the door that matched her shoe. Saw that 3 out of 6 stitches had been torn out and I was bleeding all over the place from an open wound. 2 neighbors told the police they had witnessed her kicking my door in, and you could clearly hear my ex-wife yelling, "I'm going to kill you," over and over again with other crazy things on the 911 tape, "but you don't hit a woman," so I got charged with domestic battery. Cop refused to take me to the hospital to get my stitches looked at, but did tell me he'd kick my ads if I bleed all over his car. In the end, I beat the cancer, and the judge, who was a woman, threw the charges out after listening to the 911 call. Back when I was in Boy Scouts, there was one kid who was kinda special. Not sure what his deal was. He wasn't on the spectrum, but he was just a huge oddball and did weird shit constantly that made him a bit of an outsider. Same age as me, but by the time I was a sixer, he was still just another scout. Anyways, we're camping one time, small troop, about 8 of us, and he's chopping wood, I'm cleaning dishes, pots and pans and such. I can't remember what he was doing to annoy me that time in particular, but I told him to fuck off. He didn't appreciate that and took a surprise swing at my neck with the wood axe. It was so unexpected and overreactionary that I was just stunned, till I realized there was an axe coming for my freaking neck. Luckily, I got the pan I was washing up in time to block it, but the axe cleaved in and got caught in it. He managed to wrench the axe out of his hands with the wedged pan, and the entire thing dissolved into fisticuffs till my friends pulled him away. His dad was one of the leaders and left with him very quickly. Never heard from him since, but I still imagine that axe coming for my head now and again. Kid had major anger issues. Not an attempted murder, but taxi robbers. They picked me up near home and held me for several hours trying to find a far place with an automated teller machine. Attempted to rape me, but they probably got turned off by my diarrhea that conveniently sprayed a bit in my underwear when I first realized what was happening. Got into a fight with a guy at party and beat him up pretty badly. Left, and about an hour or so later got a call that a bunch of his friends wanted to have a rumble with my friends, so being young, dumb, drunk, we all went back. I saw him standing in the doorway of the house and ran up to fight him when he swung at my head and blood came down my face. I thought he'd hit me with something, so I just started swinging and trying to grab him. He punched me a few times on my side, and all of a sudden I felt like I'd had the air knocked out of me. I looked down and my shirt was covered in blood. Turns out he was stabbing me, and the last one punctures my lung. I turn to run and he stabs me again in the shoulder, which causes me to fall down. He gets in top of me and is about to stab again when my friend's wife throws a huge porcelain pot at the guy and knocks him off me. We get in my friend's car and they rush me to the hospital. Memory is hazy on the events after this, but I remember the doctors and nurses trying to stop the bleeding and cops being there trying to talk to me. They make the cops leave and I get scared because I overhear one say they want to hear from me who did this in case I don't make it. I tell the nurse not to let me die and she says they're doing their best, but it's not looking good. I lived in a small town and the doctors at the hospital couldn't stop the bleeding, so they had to halo flight me into the city. Woke up in the hospital and remember seeing my hand was swollen like in a cartoon. Spent a week there. 8 stab wounds, 1 to the head, more of a slash, 6 to my left side, and 1 in the right shoulder. When I talked to the doctors afterwards, they said I had died twice and they brought me back. Woke up one night around midnight. Guy was standing over my bed. He spent the next 8 hours torturing, beating, and strangling me. He then made me undress and told me he was going to rape me, but he wanted to hold a knife against my throat while he did it. I bought time by telling him I had to pee and throw up, which I really did have to. When you're strangled, you lose control of your bodily functions. I told him I wouldn't struggle if he let me pee and throw up before he raped me. While hunched over the toilet, completely nude, he looked at me all of a sudden and said, "I'm going to stop hurting you now." Told me to get in my bed and forced me to take some Valium as he didn't want me neighbors to hear my crying. I passed out from the drugs and probably a combination of 1,000 other things. I woke up 2 hours later. Told him that my boss would call the police if I didn't show up to work, so I needed to go. Surprisingly, he let me go. I drove to the police department first thing and filed charges. He was charged with first-degree felony criminal burglary, 2 third-degree felony assaults, a count of misdemeanor unlawful restraint, and 1 count of criminal negligence because he destroyed my phone so I wouldn't be able to call the police during everything. He ended up getting 9 months probation because he was a first-time offender, veteran, and a drug user. I suspect he stopped hurting me as he was sobering up. I, however, was sentenced to a lifetime of emotional and physical pain on top of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Crazy how the justice system neglects victims sometimes. By the way, the guy was someone I dated and broke up with 3 months prior to this. No, he didn't have a key. I wouldn't call it attempted murder, but when I was 14 or so I managed to get a girlfriend through a friend of mine. That friend then invited me over for a sleepover. We played Xbox for an hour or so, made pancakes, and then headed to bed. He then started talking about my girlfriend at the time and how he was really jealous, which made me uncomfortable. I made up some lie saying I felt sick and wanted to go home, and he ended up pulling out an incredibly sharp 3-pronged fork and ramming it to the left half my chest twice. I ran to the shopping center, 20 minutes or so walking distance away from his house, and called my mom. She asked me what had happened. I explained the story, and I ended up being taken to hospital in blood-stained pajamas. On the plus side, I only had to get 4 stitches, and that friend now can no longer stand within 10 feet of me. A 50-year-old man grabbed me on the Wildwood Boardwalk, raped me for a while, then threw me in the ocean. This happened in the year 2012. I was 7. It wasn't reported. Mine isn't really a nice story, but I was dating a guy and his dad died early on in the relationship. He became increasingly more unstable and I was struggling to support him. One day we were over by his parents' house and his mom had to leave for a few hours. After that he started drinking and we got into a fight. I was going to leave, but he stopped me and beat me senseless. I started to yell in hopes that the neighbors would save me, but he dragged me by the hair into his dad's office and kicked me while I was on the floor. Then he opened his dad's drawer and pulled out a gun. I remember time slowed due. He was just sitting there staring at me and putting bullets in the chamber while I realized that the front door was locked and I couldn't make it to the back door in time. He raped me with the gun pressed long ways against my temple. I can still feel that coldness. Then he made me shower and put on old clothes of his. Then he made me pray for forgiveness outside of an altar his family had in their backyard. Outside of it, because I was too tainted to step inside apparently. Then I went home and pretended nothing happened because I was too scared and ashamed. You'd think I would have left, but that kicked off the sexual violence part of his abuse for the next 3 years before I got out. Loads of other times he almost killed me, but that was the most terrifying, as it was the first and the only time I saw the gun. He's still a free guy walking around living Lee. While in the United States Marines, I was in the real-life incident that became the basis of an attempted murder episode of Naval Criminal Investigative Service, Season 1, Hung Out to Dry. I was parachuting with a unit in North Carolina when the first group of Marines jumped from the plane and half the chutes didn't open. They all survived because of the reserved chutes but had broken legs. I was in the plane and about to jump as part of the second group when the jump master closed the door and made the plane land. During questioning by Naval Criminal Investigative Service, found out my parachute cords were cut like the others, and they arrested and sentenced a young Marine who wanted to murder his platoon commander. But because parachutes are randomly picked by the jumper, he cut as many cords as he could. In the TV episode, a lot of people die instead, but I once met a star of the show and told him my side of the story. When I was maybe 6, I was playing with one of my friends in the apartment complex we lived in at the time when her older brother called us in. Last thing I remember is her older brother holding a pair of luckily clean underwear over my face trying to smother me. I don't think I blacked out, but next thing I remember is walking back to my apartment and not saying anything about it. Never saw my friend again after that though. I hope she's okay. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write your similar stories in the comments. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss new super interesting videos, and I advise you to watch our other videos.